6 months. But meantime, that vulnerability is known to some, non-zero set of people. And the oops, I broke the internet, that was, basically Dan Kaminsky's reaction to the DNS issues that he had found, right? And that took, that was circulated privately for, I forget how long, 7 weeks or something like that. There were a lot of people who knew about it. There were certainly rumors flying around. And then it was, basically independently replicated once the rumors got loud enough. But nonetheless, that's one thing that needs to be accounted for, is that a lot of these vulnerabilities may be known for months, if not years, before they wind up getting disclosed. Even within CVE, because of our unique role of assigning these identifiers that people use, people will come to us ahead of time. They've discovered a vulnerability, ask us for a CVE identifier or 2 or 3, and then we'll give it to them. And that CVE identifier may go unused and unpublished for years. We have one from 2009 that I covered just yesterday in my fire hose talk, but we have hundreds of those, dating back to probably 2001 and 2002. So that's definitely one important consideration, is that there are a lot of vulnerabilities that are out there that are not public, but are known and at risk one way or another of being independently discovered.
I think one of the other aspects we were talking about last night was people not understanding the impact of a 0-day they have. Old example is the Morris worm that went out, and there's probably a lot of others as well, where the researcher might think, oh, I'm just testing this, it's a small impact, and all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, I'll use, I don't remember any specific examples, but it's happened fairly frequently, and Microsoft has kind of mentioned this publicly a number of times. A researcher might go and find a vulnerability that seems to be in an Internet Explorer or something like that. Yeah, maybe even develop an exploit, or at least give some indication that this could be a really bad kind of problem. All right, so it's bad enough that maybe it's an Internet Explorer, but Microsoft, being the vendor of the software, digs deeper, and this could apply to any vendor, and then suddenly find out, oh no, this is actually in a library that we run that affects all of the software that we use, because all of our software runs this library. So in the very early stages, you generally will not have full knowledge of what the implications are of the problem.
Carole, I just wanted to add something.
Sure.
One of the things that drives private vulnerability sharing is, solving security is not a one organization problem. It spans organizations, so there's value to private sharing in those cases. And you can see Microsoft has a case, for instance, where they will give information to the AV vendors and the IDS vendors prior to coming out with their release on Patch Tuesday, so they can start working on detection techniques. So there's a case where it's shared to a private, it's shared privately because it's a multiple organizations are trying to solve the same problem. It's all not just the single vendor. We have a case of this at Veracode too. I've started getting vulnerability information from some of my customers, where they will get a report of a vulnerability in one of their products, and we're scanning their product statically, looking for defects. And what happens is, oftentimes, if someone finds one class of vulnerability in one of their products, and once that goes public, all of a sudden the researchers go and they start looking for that vulnerability across the whole product line. And so there's a lot of value to doing static analysis, honing in on that one class of issue and making sure it's not across your whole product line. And this is another example of sharing, because multiple organizations are trying to solve the same problem, so you have to have some private vulnerability sharing.
This could start a whole rabbit hole discussion, but does anybody have any thoughts on the companies that purchase vulnerabilities purchase 0 days and then share it with their subscription list? Nobody wants to touch that, huh?
Sure.
HD had a comment.
Yeah. So specifically, there's basically 3 types of vulnerability buyers out there. You've got the folks like ZDI and iDefense that buy it primarily to provide products for their customers, either vulnerability reports in the case of iDefense, or in the case of ZDI, signatures for the filtering product. Those products, those services, those companies really don't pay very much. They pay much more than they used to, about 10 times more than they used to just 5 or 6 years ago, because of the competition from the other two buyers. Other two buyers are, one is primarily government, primarily large contractors who are selling multi-million-dollar contracts to other agencies or working on projects that are, somewhat secretive. A lot of times those companies are U.S. agencies who are actually operating outside the U.S. and buying vulnerabilities from European researchers. So it's kind of an interesting model how that works. And of course the last case are all of your shady black hats who are doing drive-by downloads, that type of exploitation. For every offer I've seen from kind of the shady government folks, I get about 5 or 6 from the shady black hat folks, and I'm not sure which one I'd prefer not to work with more. So it's there's very few options available for a legitimate researcher trying to publish the research and get paid for the process. So I'm happy that ZDI and iDefense exist, but I do wish there's more options available for researchers to get paid for their work.
Yeah, researchers seem to get beat up a lot of times. I think everyone in the software industry makes money off of the software, except for the researchers, who generally seem to be expected to do all this work for free. And at this point, with software getting a lot, at least certain kinds of software getting a lot more secure, the amount of effort that needs to go into finding an issue and then proving an exploit and so on can go on the order of months. And so I'm comfortable with programs like, I'm personally comfortable with programs like ZDI and Tipping Point because they do work with the vendors. However, there are other programs that do not, they may learn about new exploits, new vulnerabilities, and not share that information with the vendors. And that, to me, coming from a sort of purist white hat, let's have the whole internet protected, I think that's a potentially dangerous route. But it does exist, and largely because of the need for compensation for researchers.
So Carole, one of the other things is that all this information, the vendors, when they do get the knowledge of it and they start working out the patches, they actually have information that not only can they inform IDS and malware virus protection type tools, but they could also describe in a machine understandable way how to tell if you had this vulnerability when their alert goes out. And so if they did that, then all their customers wouldn't have to wait for their vulnerability management tools to rev, but rather they could ingest, and of course we offer up the OVAL language as a way of expressing how to check so that immediately customers could check and know the impact. So, getting CVEs, getting CVSS scores, doing OVAL, that's just a way of making it much quicker for people to know about what is going to be the impact of these things to them.
Good. We need to move on to the public disclosure because we could spend time on this for an entire session. So once the public's been disclosed about the vulnerability, there might be an article out in various media. There's various reactions to that. You need to have the coordination between the vendor and the researcher, which is, I think, a little bit about what you guys were just talking about. And need to determine what to disclose to the public. You don't want to start a panic. I've seen lots of cases where might be a security company that's trying to make a name for themselves, repackaged or found a repackage of a vulnerability that's 5 years old, calls it a new name, gets it out to the press, and people panic over this new virus when it's really, oh, we had this before, it's just changed the name. Nothing new. So any thoughts on the media disclosure and how the public reacts to some of these? Actually, John, you are the one who ends up dealing with this because you have your boss saying, are we vulnerable? I just read this in my paper.
Yeah, I usually get from some senior executive some article they found on some vulnerability that we've already dealt with, a couple of months or maybe 6 months, a year ago, and have to respond back saying, yes, we're aware of it, we're dealing with it, or we have dealt with it. But there's usually a firestorm of emails that go back and forth until the issue kind of dies down.
Kelly?
And speaking a little more to that, yesterday we had a little bit of a conversation about FUD versus reverse FUD, where the same media articles that John might get might overblow an issue by a factor of 10 or a factor of 100. But at the same time, you might have the reverse in that as well, where something that is a little more serious might not get the same media coverage. It's really weighing it, and the truth always sort of lies somewhere in the middle. It may not be as bad as it looks, but it's probably not going to be as downplayed as some might take it. So